Iladari. Now, you are prepared.
Hello ballers and welcome to your basic guide for the Vengeance Demon Hunter. I gave this class a lot of stick in the alpha because what it is they've taken all bits and bobs of different tank classes like iconic abilities and kind of smushed them into one. But anybody who's seen me recently will know that I've grown very, very fond of this. The flow and the way you can play this is so nice. It is so, so nice. We're going to be looking at how you can set up your talents, which ones are currently the best, but also making you aware of how the class overall works, so you guys can go on your merry way and start burning everything alive. Let's go. So let's take a look at the talents and the spells you're going to be using. In terms of gearing, it's really up to you. Are you going for more defensive, right? You're a bit under-geared, you want to prevent more damage, in which case you're going to prioritize versatility, mastery, and haste come after that. But if you're going for more damage, like you're doing Mythic Plus, and you're slightly starting to over-gear things, then you're going to focus on Critical Strike to do just much more DPS. The great choices with the Vengeance Demon Hunter are that you can spec yourself to do way more damage while still maintaining survivability. So that might sound a bit odd, but I'll explain it as we go through. Okay then, a couple of things I want you to be aware of before we do this. One is stuff like Painbringer. A lot of people don't realize Painbringer exists. We're going to be manipulating soul fragments, okay? And we're actually going to be actively tracking them, and at the end of the video I'll recommend some add-ons so you can do that correctly. When you eat a soul fragment, okay, it reduces the damage you take by 3% for 4 seconds. That doesn't sound like a long time, but it means that we can make choices elsewhere in how we use our soul fragments and our resource pain. I'm so sorry it's called pain. I don't know why they called it pain as a resource, but whatever. It's just the theme of the Demon Hunter, I suppose. So once you're aware of that, you're going to be able to do some cool things and understand that eating lesser soul fragments is actually also a defensive ability, okay? So we're going to be using a number of spells. One of them is our Generator Shear. You can spam this button constantly. And all it does is do some damage and has a chance to shatter a soul fragment. So you're going to see a lot of things that can actually generate soul fragments, okay? And also generates some pain. It gives you 10 pain a go. And that's just going to be able to be spammed. If you can't do anything else, you can spam Shear. What we then do with that pain is an endless possibility. We have our main defensive active mitigation spell on a 14-second recharge, which we can manipulate as well, and that's called Demon Spikes. Depending on your stats, you can reduce physical damage taken. As you can see, for me, it's 31% for 6 seconds. So this is a big, beefy cooldown that we can use that's very, very cheap. It increases our parry chance by 20% as well. Parry chance is RNG. Who knows what that's going to do? On top of that, we have abilities like Soul Cleave, which we may or may not choose to use. Again, I'll explain that shortly, where we strike all enemies in front of you. So this is your big cleave ability. So if you notice, Shear hits one target, Soul Cleave hits everything in front of you, okay? It does physical damage and heals you based on the amount of pain spent. So it can use 25 to 50 pain. So if you build up a big pain bar and then soul cleave it away, so if I just spam some Shear here, you'll see my pain bars going up, all good, and then I want to soul cleave, it's going to chomp away all my pain. Now, this is a reason a lot of people don't like Soul Cleave, because they want to use their pain in different ways, but one thing else it does do is it consumes all the soul fragments within 25 yards. So if you want to, what you can do is actually just use Soul Cleave as your go-to if you haven't got anything else, and you'll notice here, you see this that's ticking up? These are the soul fragments that are around me. You see these little purple orbs? They go quite far away, but when I Soul Cleave them, I suck them all in and I get the Painbringer, damage reduced by 9%. Okay, so what I'm doing is not only healing myself, but then reducing damage taken. That means that you're very responsive as a Vengeance Demon Hunter, right? Although you do have defensives that you can use before damage comes in, so Demon Spikes, if we were to say our imprisoned Weaver here was about to hit me with something scary, let's suppose we're doing Kill Jaden, Fell Claws is coming in, right? 3, 2, 1, Fell Claws, boom, I can Demon Spikes it, right? So I'm taking less and less damage, and then I can Soul Cleave, and I can take some, well, I don't have any Soul Fragments out, as you probably saw there. If I was to Immolation Aura and generate some soul fragments off that, notice that if you stand on your soul fragments, you do pick them up at the same time, is that you can then say, okay, Demon Spikes is up. I've got it ticking here. You can see I'm tracking how long my Demon Spikes is up for. I can then combine that and get some Painbringer for some extra seconds, and then I can follow it up with another Demon Spikes. So what you can actually do very effectively on a Vengeance Demon Hunter is string together stuff quite easily. You're not just reliant on activating a spell or a cooldown to prevent damage. You can keep this up by consuming soul fragments. It's very important that you're aware that that's how that works. I used a spell I called Immolation Aura. Immolation Aura is engulfing yourself in flames. Now, fire damage is a big part of being a Vengeance Demon Hunter, and it ties very heavily into another spell before I finish Immolation Aura called Fiery Brand. Fiery Brand's a 1-minute cooldown. You brand the enemy with a demonic symbol, instantly dealing 500,000 fire damage and reducing the damage that they deal to you by 40%. Another big cooldown. Okay, another big cooldown that they're putting on you, so that you're putting on them. So it only hits one target unless we tell it into it. So we can flick them with the Fiery Brand, as you can see there, and you can see here that it also increases fire damage taken by 50%. That means we can do really good bursts with the spells that do fire damage while under the effects of Fiery Brand. So one of them, of course, would be Immolation Aura. So it radiates fire damage out of you. So it's an AoE pulsing fire damage here. But we can also talent it to do other things. Other spells that we have as standard are Consume Magic. This is so important for a Vengeance Demon Hunter. I love the way they work this. It interrupts the enemy, obviously, so it's a spell interrupt, which is always good as a tank, because if somebody's casting a nasty spell at you, there's no better way of mitigating that damage than, you know, punching them in the fucking jaw and making them not cast it. But it also generates 50 pain. It gives you active tanking resources to interrupt. It's important that you learn to interrupt. It's very, very important. Other spells, our big artifact ability is the Soul Carver. Carve into the soul of your target. It's edgy. Dealing fire damage once again. An additional fire damage over 3 seconds, once again. It immediately starts shattering soul fragments from the target. And it shatters soul fragments from the target every second. So if you need on-demand soul fragments, right? So let's once again suppose we're doing Kill Jaden and we're doing Fell Claws, which is something that kills a lot of tanks. And we're like, oh god, I don't have enough soul fragments. She is not proccing me enough soul fragments, right? I'm not going to have enough. I've only got 1 soul fragment. This isn't enough. I need to get some damage reduction in the middle of it. What you can do is pair this up with Soul Carve, like this. And look, my stuff starts packing up. So cool, I'm constantly taking this. I have 5 stacks of Painbringer, 15% damage reduction on top of Demon Spikes. Do you see how this works now? You're pairing these things together to keep up with this damage reduction. Yeah, you're keeping this constant, smooth, and guaranteed damage reduction, because we don't want to just rely on randomly generating soul fragments to dictate whether or not we're going to survive. We also, of course, have Mater. Mater. What does it do for us tanks? Health increased by 50%, armor increased by 100%, shear upgraded to Sever. So Sever, strike an enemy it does exactly the same thing pretty much, and it heals you, okay? Soul fragments from the target that heal you, okay? So that's one of the extra things that you get from there. But you get a big shitload of health, a big damage reduction. You're practically immortal for the most part, right? No one's really going to die under the effect of this big 3-minute cooldown. 100% armor is wonderful. The big part of this, though, is it generates the 7 pain every 1 second, so you can actively use all your abilities on top of that. Another spell you should be aware of is Empower Wards. It reduces magical damage taken by 30% for 6 seconds, and it's on such a short cooldown, 20 seconds. It's really, really good. Be aware of it. Be really aware of it. I also want to drop in some mentions here for Sigil of Silence. Okay, silences all enemies. Really good for gathering packs. We're going to talk about, of course, Sigil of Chains shortly, but really cool for gathering packs. If you've got casters that are all spread in a circle, look at the size of this. So a big thing that tanks want to do is create what's called a death ball. That's bringing all the adds into one place, so the AoE is fantastic on them. Things that you're not going to die if things die faster. That's how you want to think about it. So with this, if you've got casters, like Murlocs are generally a nightmare for this, all spread over the place, you can drop this, and then in a few seconds, boom, they'll all be silenced and they'll all come to you. That's what you want there. And we also have the Sigil of Misery and AoE Stun, essentially, which comes in handy with that. Those are the main tanking spells I want you to be aware of as we go into our talent choices, because then things will make much more sense. So at level 99, obviously the Demon Hunter starts at high level. We get Abyssal Strike. This is what most people will go to in nearly all scenarios. Infernal Strike's range is increased by 10 yards. Its cooldown is reduced by 8 seconds. This gives you so much mobility that warriors cry into their little crappy shield spells. It just means you can move around so easily. And the cooldown is ridiculously short. It's 12 seconds. It's 12 seconds and you could be diving and leaping around dungeons. This is one of the spells. This Abyssal Strike talent is one of the reasons I love the Vengeance Demon Hunter. If I'm doing dungeon content or Mythic Plus, whatever it might be, just the fact that I can constantly just keep mobilizing myself, leaping around, and of course with another talent we can do great damage with it as well. It feels so good. Agonizing Flames, Immolation Aura increases your movement speed by 30% and deals 20% increased damage. I don't want anybody to think this is super terrible, right? Most guys won't recommend you take it in standard. That's correct. But what I want you to be aware of is if you're not having to leap around a dungeon, but you do have moments where you need to sprint to a certain location and Abyssal Strike's not available, it's a rare occurrence, that's granted, is that you can actually pull this off with him. You can use Immolation Aura as a movement speed increase to simply move really quickly. Very unlikely you're not being, let's say we need to get over here. Very unlikely we can't just do this, right? Which is very unlikely. But in the scenario that you can't, just be aware of what that does. There might be a scenario that comes up where that's better. Unlikely. Razor Spikes though. While Demon Spikes is active, you deal 30% increased physical damage in your melee attack snare target. So be aware of the snare. Okay, slowing targets down should that need to come up. But Razor Spikes is really for just big, beefy physical damage. It's a DPS increase. Abyssal Strike does come with this mobility increase, but it's only an 8-second reduction, right? So it's only an 8-second reduction, and generally speaking, you're not going to be moving around so much that you need that reduction, especially if you're tanking one boss, right? It's unlikely you're going to need to be jumping that often, in which case Razor Spikes just wins because you don't need that damage reduction, right? You might need the range, but you don't need the cooldown reduction. So you can pick either one of these two and you should be fine in most gameplay scenarios. Just be aware of what Agonizing Flames does. Level 100, a Feast of Souls. Soul Cleave, okay, heals you for an additional 200,000 over 6 seconds. So you get this hot. It's not a great hot. It's not a great hot at all. And as we're about to find out, a lot of people don't really want to use Soul Cleave anyway, for the reasons we talked about earlier, and the fact that we have better talents that can do better. So just be aware of that. It's kind of one of the weaker ones. That hot's not amazing. We're not going to be Soul Cleaving enough to generate a lot out of it. Fallout. Immolation's Aura initial burst has a chance to shatter lesser soul fragments from enemies. So I actually used this earlier on in the video, didn't I? I was like, I need some soul fragments, so I'm going to Immolation Aura it. So again, the more soul fragments we have, the better off we are. And the more guaranteed sources of lesser fragments, the better. The absolute better you're going to be, which is why having things like Fallout is really cool. Because you know, if you're going to dive into a giant AoE pack, let's say you're doing Morose. Yeah, Morose, Karazhan, you're doing some Mythic Plus Morose, you dive in there, the chances are you're going to be initially smacked by not only Morose, but his 4 adds really hard, and you're going to be like, oh shit, the second you dive in there. With stuff like Immolation Aura, you're guaranteeing you're going to get a load of soul fragments to work with instantaneously. Right? That's the kind of idea there. And plus, just more soul fragments in general is better. If you're doing dungeons and stuff, you'll be Immolation Aura-ing pretty much on cooldown with big packs. More soul fragments, the more you're going to do with your soul fragments. Burning Alive, though, every 2 seconds, your fiery brand deals 30,000 fire damage and spreads out to one nearby enemy. What was important there is the 40% damage reduction. So it comes down to what are you tanking? Okay, what are you tanking? Most of the time you're going to take Fallout, but just be aware of what this does. It can be very, very handy in certain scenarios to be aware of what it does. That's all I'm saying, is just know what it does, and is this better than Fallout? Yeah, is that damage reduction better than Fallout? Let's work down. Fellblade, so similar to the Havoc Demon Hunter. Charge to your enemy, deal damage. We don't really care about the charge, obviously. Hello, 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 hello. We don't really care about the charge. But Sheer has a chance to reset this, okay, and it generates 20 pain. So you're adding this proc into your play, which is going to be generating pain, and if you've played Havoc or saw my Havoc guide, then you'll know that Fellblade procs all the time, but it's obviously a single target ability generating more pain. Flame Crash. Infernal Strike creates a sigil of flame when you land. So you've seen this as I've been jumping around like a madman, is when I do use Abyssal Strike, boomf. Yeah, when I do use Infernal Strike, sorry, I got so used to calling it Abyssal Strike, it does create the sigil of flame underneath me. Is there anything more you want in dungeons when you're charging from pack to pack? Not really. Not really. But just be aware, if you do take Flame Crash and use single targeting something, so you've cleared all the trash and you get into the boss, you're going to be want to using Leap on cooldown, pretty much. Right? You're going to be want to leaping on cooldown to keep this Sigil of Flame, suffering fire damage every 1 second. And you also have Sigil of Flame as an actual spell. So what you can do is leap, drop Sigil of Flame, see it ticking down. You could drop a Sigil of Flame if you want to, and you could just be AoEing all the goddamn time. The AoE damage that comes from Flame Crash is fucking insane. Oh, it's wore off. I can do another one. Yeah? You could just keep it going and going and keep it burning. Fell Eruption. Fell Eruption is just a straight single target damage spell. That's pretty much it. It costs you 10 pain, so it's actually going to use some of your resources, defensive resources. It impales the target for some chaos damage, stuns them for 2 seconds. Single target, sure, you could kind of get away with Fell Eruption if you're doing some sort of solo content and you want to stun the target that can't work with things like Imprison, which imprisons demon beasts or humanoids. It's a single target damage increase, alright? It inflicts additional 100% damage against targets permanently immune to stuns, which is most bosses, right? So you just get this big damage ability that you can throw in for 10 pain every 30 seconds. So if DPS is utterly important to you, Fell Eruption. 104, Feed the Demon. Consuming a soul fragment reduces the remaining cooldown of demon spikes by 1 second. We're obviously working with a lot of soul fragments, and if having demon spikes up and having that damage reduction is crucially important, then Feed the Demon might be something you want to consider. A lot of the times it isn't, right? Because we can plan our cooldowns. It's almost like, I see this as a more, if you're just getting used to the Vengeance Demon Hunter, you might have a better time with this. Because it's just going to be naturally giving you more demon spikes. If you're severely undergeared and getting hammered, just having more demon spikes might feel better, especially if it's some boss that's physically crushing you. Remember, it's physical damage reduction. Then you might have some good times with this. Most of the time, though, let's say, like, in the current meta of the game, all right? And this is something that could change day to day. This is why I spend so much time explaining the talents to you, is because this can change on a fucking dime in the way Legion works. Most of the time, you're going to be taking Fracture. Now, Fracture costs 30 pain. You brutally slam your target, so you get a lot of damage out of Fracture. And not only that, it shatters, guarantees shattering 2 lesser soul fragments from them. And that's what's important. We're guaranteeing the generation of soul fragments. But it costs 30 pain. When you take Fracture, you're using demon spikes less, because you're spending that pain on fracturing to gain lesser soul fragments. But as we now know, that doesn't mean you're giving up on your damage reduction at all because of the artifact trait we talked about earlier. Painbringer means that every soul fragment we consume reduces the damage we take. So you're getting this sort of smoother, but less heavy. Way less heavy damage reduction, but you're getting it with also guaranteeing its uptime as well. So in nearly all occasions, you're taking Fracture. It just generally works out much, much better. Soul Rending gives 50% leech while Metamorphosis is active. Now, we randomly proc Metamorphosis. You'll see that happen regularly as your character will suddenly be in meta. If when you doing something like, if you're really struggling with, say, the Mage Tower, I used Soul Rending on the Mage Tower and got great results out of it because it just kept proccing and giving me loads of healing. In raid scenarios, though, it's unlikely you need that unless all your healers are asleep. That's what I would say. As a great passive healing, or maybe your healers are generally, you're doing, say, dungeons with shit healers, but even then, not really, because with Fracture and consuming so many soul fragments, and especially Spirit Bomb we're going to be talking about soon, you probably won't need the healing either. It's definitely a weakened ability, but just be aware if you're not getting healing from anywhere, you might want to pick this up so that you randomly proc Meta, and you can definitely activate Meta yourself. Then you're going to get a load of healing out of it at the same time. Level 106, it really comes down to you. Concentrate signals. All signals now target at your location, so they'll drop where you are, right? See the way it drops where I am, I didn't have the targeting reticule. A lot of people don't like targeting reticules, and I totally get that. When I press a button, I want it to do its job. And sigils take a second to actually work. So if you can see here, even if I take concentrated sigils, so my sigils go down to their normal time, which is after 2 seconds. If you're not great at planning stuff, this actually means sometimes it fucks you up, right? So if I want to stun some enemies, sometimes I kind of want to stun them now and I want to stun them on top of me. What I don't want to do is... I took concentrated sigils. Let me go over to here. What I don't want to do is, one, press it, then have to target something, especially if you tend to panic while tanking, and then wait 2 seconds for it to actually do its job. I don't want to do that. Well, I would prefer if my sigils just, if I press it, it happens. Like, you know what I mean? If I press it, it just happens. That's what I would prefer. So you can pick it that way. Sigil of Chains, really sad about Sigil of Chains. Not only is this spell utterly fantastic, it's also on such a long cooldown, and that generally means you're not getting the best use out of it. Like, the problem with spells like this, Sigil of Chains is very similar to the AoE grip. It's what it is, right? It sucks them all into one target. And it's also really good because you can put it somewhere where you're not even there. So if you want to bring mobs away from you, you can use this, right? You can use this spell in so many ways. What does it do? All enemies that are within the sigil get pulled to the location, so it drags them all to one place. And you can actually use it to drag things for other people. You can use Sigil of Chains in so many ways. If you're like tanking ads here and you've got your stuff set up in a raid, but the other guy's struggling, you can drop a Sigil of Chains for him. That's amazing. It's so good. The problem is, with it being such a long cooldown, you learn to play without it. And this spell is really fun and very, very useful, but most of the time you're not going to take it unless there's an absolutely desperate need for it to occur. I take generally Quicken Sigils, which is all sigils activate faster, because when I choose to use a sigil, I want it to happen now. That's how my brain works, but your brain might be different. It might work differently and something else works better, but Quicken Sigils is what I want. It not only does it activate them faster, it activates them 1 second faster, their cooldowns are reduced by 20%, which means I can use my sigils more, and I'm very much into using my sigils. I see a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunters not use their sigils a great deal at all, which is really sad, because AoE Silence, AoE Stun, Sigil of Flame is more damage, it's more CC, it's less damage taken for you. I would honestly, really, even in your early days of tanking, just get used to using sigils regularly. Let's move down then. Level 108, Fell Devastation. Unleash the Fell within you, damaging enemies directly in front of you for fire damage. Fire damage again, so we already know that synergizes well with other things. It causes damage and also heals you for up to 1 million health. Now, this goes through multiple targets. Alright, Fell Devastation is not a terrible spell. It does cost pain. It does cost pain, so you're sacrificing your other pain things. I think we're now starting to get the idea when I said earlier that you generate pain, but then the sheer amount of things you might want to do with that pain are really quite varied, which is, again, why Soul Cleave is not a looked upon as well spell. So Fell Devastation is there. It gives you this on-demand healing 1 minute cooldown. Really guaranteed one-demand healing. This is going to be beneficial in a lot of occasions, and when I explain Spirit Bomb, you'll get why. Blade Turning. Parrying an attack increases your pain generation by 20% for 5 seconds. So this is where you can kind of see where Demon Spike's parry comes in. Yeah, you're kind of guaranteeing Blade Turning. It's a total passive. So if you like a really straight up standard gameplay, Blade Turning is always kind of going to be doing its job. It generally works out at just less resources than the other two, and less benefit than the other two. But be aware, if you don't like adding extra buttons to your bar or playing in a mixing up your playstyle to get started, honestly, I totally recommend that you very quickly learn to play all the styles of your Vengeance Demon Hunter, then Blade Turning might be for you. Spirit Bomb. So Spirit Bomb recently got reworked. That doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. It could be reworked again in the future, but in nearly all occasions, you're taking Spirit Bomb now. So what does it do? It consumes all the soul fragments. This is why it works really well with Fracture, which is generating a constant stream of soul fragments, as well as Immolation Aura is generating fragments, right? Your Generator Shear is spawning fragments. We're getting fragments for days. Really good. So we're getting lots and lots of spirit fragments. Consuming all the soul fragments within 25 yards and then explode, afflicting nearby enemies with frailty for 20 seconds and damaging them for a lot per fragment, right? You heal for 20% of all damage you deal to enemies with frailty. So Spirit Bomb works in tandem with lots and lots of stuff. Not only does it work with Painbringer, but once we start going into here, right, and we start generating some pain and we're underway and we got things going on, once we start using Fracture and we start getting our soul fragments and then we Spirit Bomb them like this, you see it sucks them all in, then it goes boom. They get the frailty, we also heal, I got Mater out of that, and I got Painbringer for a while. So it actually works really well. It also gives you start seeing lots and lots of pain coming in once you get into the rotation of it. You want to ideally use it with 5 targets. Yeah, you can see I got Painbringer up. So Spirit Bomb works in a number of ways. One, it does incredible damage, it gives you a massive heal, you get damage reduction for days, and it uses your soul fragments, which you're guaranteed to be generating with Fracture as well. It synergizes so well. so well. One thing you're going to realize, though, is because you're using Fracture, you're using Demon Spikes less, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're taking more damage because you're using Demon Spikes less. It can do. What I don't want people to walk away with is if you take Spirit Bomb, and Fracture, you never use Demon Spikes. No, there's a time and a place for everything. But be aware, Spirit Bomb is generally the go-to in nearly all scenarios now. Level 110, it just totally depends on what content you're doing. Most people default to Last Resort, which is sustaining fatal damage, instead transforms you into the demon and returns you to 30% health. Its effects may only occur once every 8 minutes. It might only need to occur once every 8 minutes to change a wipe into a kill. And it might be a moment you just weren't prepared for. Suddenly, where you should have died, you're not dead. Right? Can't ask for better than that in a lot of scenarios. But in many occasions, it might never happen. So what you might have is a talent that just never activates, in which case you've got a wasted talent point. Demonic Infusion then, 1.5 minute cooldown. You draw from the power of the Twisting Nether to instantly activate and then refill your charges of Demon Spikes. Generates 60 pain. Are we taking just mass damage, mass physical damage that really fucking hurts all the time, and in these well, not all the time, but in these very predictable moments where I need to back this stuff? Then Demonic Infusion might be for you, yeah? Especially if you think about raid tanking, where you're tanking for a while, then somebody else is tanking for a while. Again, think about this swap start scenario where you're not constantly the focus of the boss's or whatever's attention. But when you do tank, it's because you're tanking something heavy and hardcore. Think about that. Or you might want to think about Soul Barrier. Costs 10 pain, 30-second cooldown. Shield yourself for 12 seconds, absorbing damage. Consuming a soul fragment adds 104,000 to the shield. Soul Barrier's absorption cannot be reduced below 124,000 damage. Consumes all the soul fragments within 25 yards. So if you take Soul Barrier, you get this absorb shield, which works on top of things. And this can be very, very nice. It absolutely can be very, very nice. So if we generate a little bit of love here, and then activate Soul Barrier. Did I put it? I did. There it is. See, I can put my Soul Barrier up now, and then I get this shield that goes with it, which is absorbing 1.3 million damage. And then I'm spamming and spamming and spamming. And you'll see that you just get this lovely shield that goes along with everything. But you generally, if you want to make use of Soul Barrier, make sure you're aware of what your soul fragments are doing in order to get the benefit out of it. Remember, more soul fragments, the better, that go along with it. These are all things you need to be aware of, is what are my soul fragments doing? It's the basis of everything is what are my soul fragments doing? How many of them do I have? Can I get it? Notice, though, that when you go over on your soul fragments, is that Painbringer is naturally happening. You see this? I'm naturally getting it. I'm not consuming any on point. I'm not doing any intentionally. I'm just letting the natural ones over 5 just pick up themselves, or the ones that I'm stood on pick up as well. So be aware of how those things work. And those are your talents, my friends. So gameplay then. Now I've covered most things in the talent section, but we'll do a quick refresher anyway. The Vengeance Demon Hunter is all about managing this pain generation with soul fragments and then working all of those things into your rotation while also pre-planning what you want to use those pain and soul fragments on. That's the crux of everything. In terms of, we don't have anything like the Blood Demon Hunter where we're keeping diseases and stuff up. A lot of our AoE comes very naturally. We have things like Sigil of Flame, Flame Crash, we have Immolation Aura, all those things are pretty natural. But one good thing about the Vengeance Demon Hunter is that our gameplay is both offensive and defensive in most occasions. The only thing that isn't generally is Demon Spikes, and even if you take Razor Spikes, it actually is. The important thing to remember is don't just be spamming for damage. So I can go Fiery Brand and start unleashing an absolute metric shit ton of fire damage, but remember I'm using a lot of defensive cooldowns in order to get that done. So what you want to be doing is thinking not only in terms of raw damage output, and I'll see a lot of Vengeance Demon Hunters who make mistakes of just playing as DPS, which is fine, especially if you overgear content. Don't worry, don't be saying I'm saying that's wrong. If you overgear content or damage is crucially important to your group, then sure, play that way. But you also have to remember how your spec works. Are you taking Fracture, in which case you want to be using Fracture? Are you managing your fragments correctly? Are you Spirit Bombing correctly like this? Is it the right time to Spirit Bomb and put as much frailty and damage up there? Is that what you want to be doing? Am I managing this? It can be, if you take some of the talents that I've recommended here, an extremely fast-paced class. Extremely fast-paced. You constantly have something to be doing. You need to be checking, am I in meta all the time? Am I doing this and that? And what are they going to... Am I using all my spells effectively? Am I just sitting on spells unnecessarily when I should be doing something else with them? I don't want people to be overburdened with all this stuff. It basically comes down to one thing. How many soul fragments do I have? What do I want to use them on? All of those DPS spells work in a similar sort of vein to try and give you pain, yeah? And then give you soul fragments off the back of it. That's what they're for. Immolation Aura, don't think of it as just AoE damage. Think of it as shattering soul fragments out if you've taken the talent. Don't think of Fiery Brand as just being increased fire damage taken. Think of it as a 40% damage reduction cooldown, right? Don't think of Sigil of Flame as just a spell to keep on cooldown, which it generally is, but when do I want to use it? If you don't take things that quick up, if you don't take things like Flame Crash or Abyssal Strike, do I want this when moving into the next pack? Yeah? You have to know what talent setup you've got and how to play this in order to utilize it effectively. Do I want to use these soul fragments on a Spirit Bomb, or do I want a Soul Barrier with them? What do I want to do here? These are all what's going through your head while you're doing things. The damage comes naturally, and you can certainly turn it up to 12 with damage, but bear in mind that your damaging spells are also defensive in some way. Alright, guys? My conclusion to the Vengeance Demon Hunter is a spec that I thought was a bit of a mock when I first saw its implementation back in Legion Alpha. And over the last sort of 3 months, gearing these classes up for the guides, it's one of the tanks I've grown more and more fond with. I personally love the fact that I'm doing offensive and defensive stuff simultaneously. I'm also doing it at a quick rate, and the speed and mobility of the class really appeals to me personally. Although I know some people will just look at it as a derp spec that simply heals itself from all damage done and is crap. And especially in early Legion, the Vengeance Demon Hunter got a lot of stick for being not useful enough or not the best tank. But at the same time, there was only one tank that was really shining, and in the modern tank rebalancing, Vengeance Demon Hunters are actually just fine. I've personally seen them tank all the content so far that's available to be killed, and that's absolutely great, and nobody should feel bad about rolling a Vengeance Demon Hunter. Be aware of the gear changes if you want to go more crit or more defensive, and make choices and carry multiple gear sets so you can really see the benefits of this class. Now, throughout the guide, I've talked about tracking things in order to make best choices out of them. I recommend weak auras and tell me when, and also please check out the Vengeance Demon Hunters or the Demon Hunters Discords for up-to-date changes. I've spent a lot of time here explaining how all the talents work, which one is best, or any gear stats and stuff that might change on a daily basis. That's something we can never ever account for, and legendaries might change it as well. You might pick up legendaries which totally change your gameplay and push other talents to be ahead. That's stuff that we could never account for in this kind of time frame. Alright, so the better and more gear you get, start looking to detailed resources if this is a class you love. But if it's not a class you love and you want to play it for fun, just to have some fun with your friends, then this should be everything you ever need. Thank you so much for listening, guys. I'll see you again.